If you're listening to this right now, pause for a second. Look around you. The walls, the floor beneath your feet, the tools in your hands. Everything you see is built on one assumption. We all grew up believing without question that human civilization started small, crude, and slowly climbed its way toward intelligence. That we are the most advanced humans who have ever lived. But what if that story is wrong? What if the farther back you go, the smarter we get? Because buried beneath a quiet hill in southeastern Turkey is a place that should not exist. A place that doesn't just challenge history, it breaks it. And once you understand what was found there, it becomes impossible to see humanity the same way again. This is not a legend. This is not a fringe theory. This is not speculation. This is a carbon-dated, peer-reviewed, scientifically verified site that forces us to confront a disturbing possibility. That the people who came before us were not primitive at all. They were masters. 12,000 years ago, the world was ending. The last ice age was collapsing. Glaciers were melting at catastrophic speed. Sea levels were rising hundreds of feet. Entire coastlines vanished beneath the ocean. Mammoths still walked the land. Saber-toothed cats hunted in the shadows. And human beings, according to everything we were taught, were barely surviving. Small bands, stone tools, animal skins, no cities, no engineering, no large-scale planning. That is the official story. And yet, at this exact moment in time, around 9,600 BC, something impossible was happening on a windswept ridge of limestone. Someone was quarrying stone. Not small stones, not rubbles, but monoliths weighing up to 20 tons each. Someone was carving them with precision so clean it rivals modern stonework. Someone was arranging them into massive geometric enclosures. Someone was engineering floors so advanced that the technology wouldn't reappear for thousands of years. And then, after completing one of the most ambitious construction projects in human history, they did something even stranger. They buried it, deliberately, carefully, and completely. And then they vanished. The site is known today as Göbekli Tepe, and its existence demolishes the timeline you were taught in school. Because Göbekli Tepe is older than Stonehenge by 7,000 years, older than the Egyptian pyramids by 6,000 years, older than the invention of the wheel by 4,000 years. Let that sink in. The people who built this had no metal tools, no domesticated animals, no wheeled transport, no agriculture. According to textbooks, they shouldn't even have had the calories to attempt something like this. Yet they did. And they didn't do it poorly. They did it perfectly. To understand why this site is so disruptive, you have to understand what the world was like when it was built. 9,600 BC isn't just ancient, it's practically another planet. Britain wasn't an island. It was connected to Europe by a vast landmass now drowned beneath the North Sea. Sea levels were over 300 feet lower than today. Entire ecosystems existed that no longer do. Humanity was living in what archaeologists call the Stone Age. And everywhere else on Earth, humans were doing exactly what you'd expect. They were hunting. They were gathering. They were surviving. Except here, on this single ridge of limestone, someone decided survival wasn't enough. They decided to build something permanent, something monumental, something that would outlast them. What makes Göbekli Tepe terrifying to archaeologists isn't just its size. It's the timing. Because when researchers began excavating the site, they found something deeply unsettling. The oldest layers, the deepest, earliest constructions, are the most advanced. Massive circular enclosures, perfectly shaped T-pillars, high-relief carvings of animals executed with surgical precision, engineered floors made from a chemical process requiring extreme heat control. As time moves forward in the soil layers, the technology gets worse. The structures become smaller. The craftsmanship degrades. The art simplifies. The knowledge fades. History isn't progressing here. It's regressing. That alone should make you uncomfortable. But here's where the story becomes personal. Because Göbekli Tepe forces a question that no one likes to ask. If humans were capable of this level of intelligence before farming, before cities, before writing, then what else have we forgotten? What else was lost? And what does that say about us? We like to believe we're standing at the peak of a long upward climb, that we are the smartest, most advanced version of humanity to ever exist. Göbekli Tepe whispers a different story. It suggests that civilization doesn't move in a straight line. It rises. It peaks. It collapses. And sometimes it is buried on purpose. In the next part, we'll uncover how this site was nearly missed entirely, dismissed as nothing more than rubble, and how one archaeologist realized he was standing on top of the most important discovery in human history. Because once the first pillar emerged from the soil, there was no turning back. History had already begun to crack. For nearly 30 years, the most important archaeological site on Earth was ignored. Not buried by time, not erased by catastrophe, but dismissed by a clipboard. In the early 1960s, a joint survey team from the University of Chicago and the University of Istanbul walked straight across a low hill in southeastern Turkey. They noticed broken limestone fragments, flint tools scattered across the surface, stone slabs protruding from the soil. They wrote it all down, and then they made a simple assumption. They decided it was a Byzantine cemetery, a medieval graveyard of little significance, and moved on. That single error delayed the rewriting of human history by decades. Because what they were standing on wasn't a graveyard. It was an artificial mountain. For years, local farmers had been plowing around strange stone shapes that refused to move. Pillars would break their tools. Slabs would emerge after heavy rains. Some stones were so large they were simply left in place, treated as natural obstacles. No one imagined what lay beneath. Why would they? According to everything we believed, there was no reason for something like this to exist. Until 1994. That's when a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt climbed the ridge and immediately knew something was wrong. Schmidt wasn't looking for temples. He was studying Stone Age flint tools at nearby sites. He had trained his eye to recognize subtle differences in stonework, differences most people would miss entirely. When he reached the top of the hill, he didn't see a medieval cemetery. He saw intention. The flint fragments weren't random. They were too dense, too concentrated, and the hill itself didn't behave like a natural formation. It rose sharply from the surrounding plateau, nearly 50 feet high and stretching almost 1,000 feet across. This wasn't geology. It was architecture disguised as a hill. Schmidt realized he was standing on a tell, a mound created by centuries of human activity layered on top of itself. But this tell was unlike any other. It was enormous. And when he broke ground, history changed forever. Just inches below the surface, Schmidt's team struck stone. Not rubbles. A perfectly squared T-shaped pillar. Its edges were sharp, its surfaces smooth, its corners precise. This was not a crude monolith dragged into place. This was engineered. As excavation continued, more pillars emerged, massive ones, arranged in a circle, set into sockets carved directly into the bedrock, each weighing up to 20 tons. And then came the date. Carbon dating of organic material trapped in the fill pointed to around 9,600 BC. That number didn't just raise eyebrows. It detonated the timeline. Because according to archaeology, nothing like this should exist at that date. No farming, no villages, no permanent settlements. And yet here were monumental stone structures, not shelters, not homes, but something else entirely. Schmidt began searching for the usual signs of early civilization. Pottery? None. Pottery wouldn't appear in this region for thousands of years. Domesticated animals? None, no sheep, no goats, no cattle. Cultivated plants? None, no wheat, no barley. Instead, the bones found in the fill belonged exclusively to wild animals. Gazelle, wild boar, giant aurochs. The builders were, by definition, hunter-gatherers. And that presented an impossible problem. To quarry, transport, and erect a single 20-ton pillar without wheels, without beasts of burden, and without metal tools would require hundreds of people working in coordination. Modern engineering estimates suggest at least 400 to 500 men per pillar. Not for a day, for weeks. To feed that workforce, plus their families, plus tool makers, planners, leaders. You need an enormous and reliable calorie supply. But hunter-gatherers are supposed to live hand-to-mouth. No surplus, no storage, no specialization. Yet Göbekli Tepe proved that assumption wrong. These people organized large-scale labor. They planned years ahead. They coordinated logistics on a regional scale. They weren't just surviving. They were mobilizing. And then Schmidt noticed something even more unsettling. There were no houses, no hearths, no sleeping areas, no domestic trash. This wasn't a village. It was something else. A place people traveled to. A destination. Which raised a dangerous question. If people were coming here from miles away, why? What was powerful enough to draw hundreds, possibly thousands of people to this ridge before cities, before farming, before written language? The answer Schmidt believed was ideology, not survival. A belief. As more enclosures were uncovered, the picture sharpened. The pillars weren't random stones. They were stylized human figures. Arms carved in low relief ran down their sides. Hands met at the front, belts wrapped around their waists. But their faces were missing. No eyes, no mouths. They were anonymous, abstract, and that abstraction was deliberate. Because faceless figures allow projection. An ancestor, a spirit, God. Whoever stood inside these enclosures wasn't just looking at stone. They were being watched. Schmidt reached a conclusion that shook archaeology. Religion didn't arise after civilization. Civilization arose because of religion. The temples came first. The need to gather people, to feed them, to organize them, that pressure forced innovation. Farming didn't create belief. A belief created farming. And Göbekli Tepe was the spark. But the deeper the excavation went, the stranger the story became. Because the oldest structures were the most complex. And as centuries passed, the builders didn't improve. They forgot, which meant the people who built the earliest enclosures didn't invent this knowledge here. They brought it with them. And that leaves us with an uncomfortable mystery. If Göbekli Tepe wasn't the beginning, then where did this knowledge come from? In the next part, we'll look closely at the engineering itself, the stone, the floors, the tools, and uncover evidence of a level of technical understanding that history says should have been impossible. Because once you understand how they built this, you'll realize we are not looking at the birth of civilization. We're looking at its echo. To really understand why Göbekli Tepe terrifies archaeologists, you have to stop thinking like a historian and start thinking like an engineer. Because the true impossibility of this site isn't philosophical. It's physical. Stone doesn't care about belief systems. Gravity doesn't care about mythology. Physics does not bend to storytelling, and Göbekli Tepe violates physics, unless the people who built it knew far more than we ever gave them credit for. Let's start with the stone itself. The pillars at Göbekli Tepe are not loose boulders gathered from a riverbed. They were carved from solid limestone bedrock, quarried directly from the surrounding plateau. Some of these pillars stand over 18 feet tall. Many weigh between 16 and 20 tons. One unfinished pillar still lying in the quarry would have weighed over 50 tons if completed. Now pause and imagine that. No metal tools, no cranes, no pulleys, no wheels, no oxen, no horses, just stone tools, rope, wood, human muscle. And not on flat ground, on a rocky ridge. The quarry is only a few hundred meters away from the enclosures, but that distance might as well be a mile when you're dragging 20 tons uphill across uneven limestone bedrock. We're often told a simple explanation: log rollers. But that explanation collapses immediately. Log rollers only work on flat, prepared surfaces. On rough ground, the logs jam, snap, or crush. The plateau around Göbekli Tepe is jagged bedrock, not soil, not sand. Which means before they could move the pillars, they had to engineer the path. That alone is a massive construction project. And then comes the hardest part: a placement. The pillars at Göbekli Tepe are not simply dropped into holes. They are socketed into pedestals carved directly out of the living bedrock. The tolerance is terrifyingly tight. If a 20-ton pillar is tilted even a few degrees during placement, the center of gravity shifts, and the entire stone topples, shattering months of labor. There are no crane marks, no pulley anchors, no metal fittings, which means the builders relied on something far more difficult: a precision coordination. Hundreds of people pulling, lifting, bracing, and releasing at exactly the right moment. That requires leadership, a command structure, experience. This wasn't improvisation. It was choreography. But the stone pillars aren't even the most advanced feature. The floors are. In a typical hunter-gatherer site, the floor is dirt, maybe packed mud, nothing more. But inside several of the main enclosures at Göbekli Tepe, the floors are waterproof. They are made from a material known today as terrazzo. In the modern world, terrazzo is created by mixing crushed stone with cement or resin, then polishing it smooth. It's used in airports and government buildings because it's durable and impermeable. Finding it in a site dated to 9,600 BC is absurd. Because to make this type of floor, you must first produce burnt lime. And burnt lime is not accidental. To create burnt lime, limestone must be heated to temperatures between 800 and 900 degrees Celsius, over 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and held there long enough to trigger a chemical transformation. That requires A kiln, controlled oxygen flow, massive amounts of fuel, a precise temperature management. This is chemical engineering, not survival behavior. And after creating the lime, the builders crushed limestone, mixed it with water, spread it across the floor, and polished it into a smooth, sealed surface. Why go through all that effort? Why burn precious wood in a resource-scarce Ice Age environment just to make a floor? Because these floors were designed to hold liquids. Water, blood, a fermented drink. We don't know which, but we know one thing for certain. This wasn't decorative. It was functional. Then there's the art. Most Stone Age art is incised, scratched lightly into rock. At Göbekli Tepe, the art is high relief. Three-dimensional animals emerge from the stone. Leopards, snakes, boars, vultures, muscles, teeth, movement. To create high relief, you don't carve the animal. You carve away everything that isn't the animal. That means visualizing the final form inside a 20-ton block before the first strike. One mistake, one cracked limb, one broken snout, and the entire pillar is ruined. The fact that dozens of these carvings exist, executed flawlessly, tells us something critical. This was not experimental. This was mastery. You don't start your artistic tradition with 3D megalithic sculpture. You end it there, which means the learning phase is missing. And that missing phase is the most unsettling part of all. Because Göbekli Tepe doesn't show us the rise of these skills. It shows us the peak. The oldest layers are the best, which means the knowledge was inherited, brought from somewhere else, from a place we haven't found, or a place that no longer exists. Think about what that implies. The people who built Göbekli Tepe already knew how to quarry, transport, engineer, sculpt, and chemically transform stone. They didn't discover these skills here. They arrived with them, which raises a question that history is not prepared to answer. If this wasn't the beginning of advanced knowledge, what came before it? In the next part, we'll step back and look at the layout of the site itself, the geometry, the positioning, the hidden mathematical precision, and uncover evidence that these builders weren't just engineers. They were planners, and they were thinking in shapes far larger than a single temple. At first glance, Göbekli Tepe looks chaotic. Massive stone pillars, circular enclosures, walls that curve instead of running straight. For years, archaeologists assumed the builders were working by eye, placing stones where they felt right, adjusting as they went, improvising as hunter-gatherers supposedly did. That assumption turned out to be wrong. Very wrong. Because when the site was finally mapped in detail, something emerged that no one was prepared for. A hidden order. The main structures at Göbekli Tepe are known as enclosures A, B, C. and D each consists of a circular stone wall with T-shaped pillars set around the perimeter, and two larger pillars standing at the center. For a long time, these circles were treated as independent projects. One built, then another added later, perhaps over generations. But in 2020, a team of researchers did something no one had tried before. They analyzed Göbekli Tepe the way a modern architect would analyze a building plan. Using spatial analysis software normally reserved for contemporary construction, they mapped the exact center points of the three largest and oldest enclosures, B, C, and D. What they found was disturbing. The centers of those three enclosures form a near-perfect equilateral triangle. Not approximate, not close enough, geometrically precise. Each point of the triangle aligns with the midpoint between the two central pillars of each enclosure. This was not accidental. An equilateral triangle requires intention. It requires forethought. It requires measuring distances and angles before construction begins. Which means before a single pillar was carved. The builders already knew where everything would go. Let that sink in. These people weren't reacting to problems as they arose. They weren't experimenting. They weren't building one enclosure and then deciding what to do next. They were executing a master plan, a site-wide blueprint. And that raises a chilling implication. If they could conceptualize a project on this scale, across multiple massive structures, then they weren't thinking like tribes. They were thinking like a civilization. The precision becomes even more unsettling when you look at orientation. The central pillars in enclosure D, the largest and most complex structure, are aligned almost perfectly along a north-south axis. That alone is unusual. But orientation in ancient sites often points upward, not outward, to the sky. Because the sky 12,000 years ago did not look like the sky today. Earth's axis slowly wobbles in a cycle known as the precession of the equinoxes. Over roughly 26,000 years, the positions of stars shift dramatically. By reconstructing the ancient sky using astronomical software, researchers have been able to simulate what the heavens looked like around 9,600 BC. And what they found suggests that Göbekli Tepe wasn't just aligned to the land. It was aligned to the cosmos. One theory proposes that the central pillars in enclosure D point toward the rising or setting of specific stars, possibly Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. At the time Göbekli Tepe was built, Sirius was just reappearing on the horizon after thousands of years of invisibility due to precession. Its first rising would have been a dramatic event, a celestial rebirth. In later civilizations, Sirius became deeply symbolic. In Egypt, it was associated with renewal, the flooding of the Nile, and divine order. But Göbekli Tepe predates Egypt by 6 millennia, which means the symbolism came first. Then there is Pillar 43, known today as the Vulture Stone. At first glance, it looks like another dense carving of animals. A vulture, a scorpion, a goose, strange abstract symbols, and a headless human figure. For decades, no one could explain it. Until researchers in 2017 proposed something radical. That it wasn't art at all. It was a star map. According to this interpretation, the animals on the stone correspond to specific constellations. The scorpion represents Scorpius. The vulture aligns with Cygnus. Other symbols match stars visible during a specific moment in time. When the sky is simulated backward to around 10,950 BC, the arrangement matches the carving almost perfectly. That date is not random. It corresponds to the onset of the Younger Dryas, a sudden and catastrophic cooling event that plunged the world back into Ice Age conditions. Many scientists believe this event was triggered by fragments of a comet striking the Earth. A cosmic disaster. The headless figure on the stone may represent death. The vulture, a creature associated with the sky and scavenging, may represent the heavens. Taken together, Pillar 43 may not depict mythology. It may record trauma, a warning etched in stone, a memory of a day when the sky turned against humanity. If that interpretation is correct, Göbekli Tepe is not just a temple. It's an archive, a place where knowledge was encoded in geometry, symbol, and stone, designed to survive long after oral memory failed. This also explains the obsession with precision. If you believe the universe can collapse without warning, you don't build casually. You build permanently. You mirror the heavens on earth in the hope that order can be restored. As above, so below. A principle that would later appear in civilizations across the globe. The geometry of Göbekli Tepe tells us something profound. These builders weren't just reacting to their environment. They were interpreting it, mapping it, and responding with architecture that blended mathematics, astronomy, and belief into a single unified system. They weren't staring at the sky in confusion. They were measuring it, recording it, and building in dialogue with it. In the next part, we'll step inside these enclosures and examine how sound, darkness, fear, and design were used to manipulate human psychology, turning stone into a tool of social control. Because Göbekli Tepe wasn't just built to impress the gods. It was built to shape the minds of the people who stood within it. When we look at Göbekli Tepe today, it's easy to admire it from a distance. The pillars, the carvings, the geometry. But that's not how it was meant to be experienced. Göbekli Tepe was never designed to be viewed calmly in daylight. It was designed to be entered. And once you step inside, everything changes. Modern architecture shapes how you feel without you noticing. A cathedral ceiling makes you feel small. A narrow hallway makes you slow down. A dark room sharpens fear. A spotlight tells you where to look. This is called psychological architecture. For a long time, we believed this was a modern invention. Göbekli Tepe proves it is not. The first thing you notice about the enclosures is how restricted they are. These are not open plazas. The entrances are narrow, awkward, sometimes requiring a person to duck or squeeze through stone passages. This is not accidental. Restriction creates transition. It marks the boundary between the outside world and the inside world, between the ordinary and the sacred. Crossing that threshold is not passive. It is an ordeal. You leave daylight behind. You leave freedom behind. And you submit. Once inside, you are surrounded. The stone walls curve inward. The pillars stand close. There is no straight line of sight to the outside. If these enclosures were roofed, and many archaeologists believe they were, then the space would have been dim, enclosed, and echoing. Firelight would flicker across carved animals frozen mid-snarl. The shadows would move. The sound would behave strangely. And that brings us to acoustics. Circular stone chambers are not neutral spaces. They amplify low-frequency sound. A drumming, a chanting, a rhythmic stamping. At certain frequencies, around 110 hertz, sound waves can vibrate the human chest and interfere with normal brain activity. Studies in acoustic archaeology show that these frequencies can induce trance-like states, distort time perception, and suppress analytical thought. In simple terms, they make people suggestible. Now imagine this. A group enters the enclosure at night. Torches flicker. Drums begin. The stone walls reflect the sound back inward, growing louder, deeper, overwhelming. The carvings seem to move in the firelight. Predators surround you. Your sense of self dissolves. This is not worship as comfort. This is ritual as transformation. Look closely at the imagery carved into the pillars. You won't find flowers. You won't find peaceful animals. You will not find scenes of daily life. Instead, you see fangs, claws, venom, predators frozen mid-attack, snakes, scorpions, spiders, leopards, vultures. This is an iconography of danger, of death, of forces that cannot be reasoned with. The message is clear. The world is hostile. Nature is violent. Survival requires appeasement. This is not a religion of gratitude. It is a religion of fear management. And then there are the pillars themselves. They are human-shaped, arms, hands, belts, but faceless. No eyes. No mouths. This is crucial. A faceless figure can be anything. An ancestor, a god, a spirit, a judge. Facelessness allows projection, and projection creates authority. You don't know who is watching you. But you feel watched. This creates what psychologists call a panopticon effect, behavior regulated by the belief of constant observation. Long before surveillance cameras, long before laws, a stone enforced obedience. Then there is the skull evidence. Fragments of human skulls have been found at Göbekli Tepe, with cut marks showing defleshing after death. Some skulls have drilled holes. These were not burials. They were displays. In Neolithic cultures of the region, skulls were often removed from graves, plastered, painted, and kept in ritual spaces. At Göbekli Tepe, skulls may have been hung on pillars or walls. Imagine standing in a dark stone chamber, surrounded by carved predators with human skulls watching from above. This is lineage made visible, the power made physical. It says, "We were here before you. We will be here after you. Our dead are watching." There is one more layer to this control. Labor. Moving a 20-ton pillar requires hundreds of people working together in exhaustion and coordination. That kind of labor forges identity. It binds people. You don't walk away from something you helped build with your body. Göbekli Tepe anchored people to place, to each other, to belief. In small hunter-gatherer groups, conflict is solved by separation. If tensions rise, people leave. But you can't leave a monument. Not easily. The stone keeps you together. This is the most unsettling realization of all. Göbekli Tepe didn't just invent monumental architecture. It invented social gravity, a force that pulled people inward, held them in place, and reshaped how humans organized themselves. A belief became infrastructure. Stone became authority, and ritual became governance. In the next part, we'll confront the greatest practical mystery of all. How did these people feed this system? How did hunter-gatherers support massive construction, endless rituals, and large gatherings without farms? Because the answer doesn't just explain Göbekli Tepe. It explains why civilization began at all, and why it may have been a mistake. A stone can be explained. A belief can be explained. Even fear can be explained. But there is one law that Göbekli Tepe cannot escape. Energy. Every movement of stone, every carved pillar, every ritual gathering, all of it runs on calories. And according to everything we know, this project should have collapsed under its own hunger. Let's be brutally practical. A single adult hauling stone, dragging rope, lifting weight, burns between 4,000 and 5,000 calories per day. That's double what most people consume today. Now scale that up. To quarry, transport, and erect just one major pillar at Göbekli Tepe would require hundreds of workers. Add tool makers, add planners, add ritual specialists, add families. You are suddenly feeding thousands of mouths. every day, without farms, without domesticated animals, without grain silos. According to the standard model of history, this is impossible. Hunter-gatherers are supposed to live day to day. They hunt what they need. If the hunt fails, they go hungry. You cannot run a mega project on maybe. Yet Göbekli Tepe ran for centuries. So where did the food come from? The answer was buried in bone. Hundreds of thousands of animal remains have been recovered from the site. Not scattered randomly. Not the leftovers of casual meals, but the remains of industrial-scale feasting. Gazelle bones dominate, followed by wild cattle, wild sheep, and boar. These animals weren't hunted one at a time. They were taken in mass kills. Across the Near East, archaeologists have identified large stone structures known as desert kites, long funnel-shaped walls stretching for kilometers, designed to herd migrating animals into traps or kill zones. Once inside, entire herds could be slaughtered in a single event. This wasn't hunting. It was production. And it produced something crucial: a surplus. But meat alone isn't enough. Protein fuels muscle, but it doesn't sustain large populations for long periods. For that, you need carbohydrates, a stable energy. Which brings us to a discovery that quietly upended everything. Stone vats found at Göbekli Tepe and nearby sites were analyzed for residue. What researchers found was calcium oxalate, a chemical byproduct left behind by fermented grain. In other words, beer. Not symbolic beer. Not ritual traces. Actual brewing. Tons of it. To brew beer, you need grain. Large amounts of it. You must harvest it, thresh it, crush it, ferment it, store it. This requires planning, coordination, time, which means the people of Göbekli Tepe were not just gathering grain opportunistically. They were managing it. Here's where the story flips. For decades, we believed humans invented agriculture because they wanted food security, because they were hungry. But what if that's wrong? What if they invented agriculture because they wanted ritual? Because they wanted feasts? Because belief demanded abundance? Imagine the scene. People travel from across the region days, even weeks, to reach Göbekli Tepe. Rituals are held. Animals are slaughtered en masse. Beer flows. The feast becomes a competition. The group that provides the largest gathering gains prestige, power, influence, and suddenly wild grain isn't enough. There isn't enough time to gather it all. So someone has an idea. What if we plant it closer? What if we water it? What if we control it? Genetic studies provide a stunning confirmation. Modern strains of wheat, 68 varieties, trace their ancestry to a single wild plant, einkorn wheat. And where does wild einkorn grow naturally? On the slopes of Karakadeg, a volcanic region just 20 miles from Göbekli Tepe. The birthplace of agriculture sits right next to the birthplace of monumental religion. This is not coincidence. This is cause and effect. Temples did not arise because people farmed. People farmed because temples demanded it. Religion created surplus pressure. The surplus pressure created farming. Farming created civilization. And civilization came with a price. The skeletal record tells the rest of the story. The earliest builders of Göbekli Tepe were tall for their time. Strong bones, excellent teeth, diverse diets. As agriculture takes hold, everything changes. People get shorter. Bones weaken. Teeth rot from starchy diets. Diseases jump from animals to humans. Tuberculosis. Brucellosis. A crowded living. A close contact with livestock. Farming brought calories, but it also brought suffering. This is the tragic irony of Göbekli Tepe. The site was built by free people. Hunter-gatherers who chose when to work, when to move, when to rest. But in feeding the monument, they invented the system that would eventually trap humanity. Fields must be tended. Harvests guarded. A surplus controlled. Someone stops working. Someone starts managing. Someone starts ruling. The priests who controlled access to ritual. The leaders who controlled the feast. They became the first elites. Not kings with crowns, but managers of belief and food. Power didn't come from force. It came from distribution. Göbekli Tepe wasn't just a temple. It was an engine. A machine that converted belief into calories. And calories into hierarchy. In the next part, we'll watch that system begin to fail. Because something went wrong. The knowledge faded. The craftsmanship declined. And the greatest construction project of its age began to unravel from within. In archaeology, there is an assumption so fundamental that it's almost never questioned. That knowledge accumulates. That each generation learns a little more than the last. That tools improve. That techniques sharpen. That progress moves forward. Göbekli Tepe violates that assumption completely. Because here, time moves in the wrong direction. When archaeologists first began excavating the site, they expected to see a familiar pattern. Early layers would be crude. Later layers would be refined. That's how history is supposed to work. But Göbekli Tepe tells a different story. The deepest layers, the oldest, are the most sophisticated. And everything after that is decline. The earliest phase of construction, known as level III, dates to around 9600 BC. This is where we find the monumental circular enclosures. The 20-ton T-shaped pillars, the perfect terrazzo floors, the high-relief three-dimensional carvings, the precise geometry, the cosmic alignments. This is the peak. Then something happens. As we move upward through the soil layers, forward in time, the architecture changes. The great circles disappear. They are replaced by smaller, rectangular rooms. The pillars shrink dramatically, from towering giants to modest stones barely taller than a person. The carvings lose depth. The terrazzo floors vanish. What remains is simpler, cheaper, weaker. By around 8,200 BC, the Great Project has slowed. By 8,000 BC, it stops entirely. This is not evolution. It is regression. And regression is far more difficult to explain. One possibility is brain drain. As agriculture took hold, the very system Göbekli Tepe helped create human attention shifted. The strongest workers were needed in the fields. The brightest planners were needed to manage crops. The best organizers were needed to distribute food. The temple lost priority. The machine that created civilization consumed the civilization that created it. Another possibility is social fracture. Göbekli Tepe required hierarchy, formant, ritual specialists, leaders who could command hundreds of people. That kind of power rarely remains stable. Resentment builds. Authority is challenged. The shift from communal circular enclosures to smaller rectangular rooms may reflect fragmentation, private ritual replacing shared experience. The unified vision cracked. But the strangest part of all comes next. They didn't abandon the site. They didn't let it crumble. They didn't strip it for stone. They buried it. Around 8,000 BC, a decision was made that defies logic. The people of Göbekli Tepe mobilized one final time, not to build but to erase. They filled the enclosures with thousands of tons of material. Stone rubble, limestone chips, flint flakes, animal bones, clean soil. This was not trash. It was deliberate backfill, carefully packed, evenly layered. They filled the chambers from floor to ceiling, encasing the pillars like fossils. The labor required to bury the site may have rivaled the labor required to build it. Why would a culture do this? There are several theories. None of them are comforting. The first is ritual closure. In some belief systems, sacred spaces have lifespans. When a cycle ends, the space must be returned to the earth. The burial may have been an act of reverence, sealing the power inside the hill. Preserving it, not destroying it. The second is protection. If the culture was collapsing, or if hostile groups were moving into the region, burying the site would prevent desecration. A time capsule. a hope that someone someday would return. The third theory is the most unsettling. A fear. What if the belief system itself became dangerous? What if the rituals went too far? What if the skull cult, the blood rituals, the obsession with cosmic catastrophe began to terrify the next generation? Perhaps burying the site wasn't about preservation. Perhaps it was about containment, closing a door that should never have been opened. Whatever the reason, the burial worked. By sealing the site beneath tons of earth, the builders protected it from erosion, looting, and time. The soft limestone carvings remained crisp. The floors remained smooth. Göbekli Tepe entered a state of suspended animation. Waiting. This leads to a chilling realization. The people who buried Göbekli Tepe knew someone would eventually find it. They curated their own discovery. They left a message in stone, knowing it would outlast them. And they were right. But regression raises a deeper question. If the earliest builders arrived with advanced knowledge already intact, where did that knowledge come from? You don't wake up one day knowing how to engineer terrazzo floors. You don't accidentally master monolithic sculpture. These are traditions, learned, practiced, passed down, which means the true origin of this knowledge lies somewhere else. Somewhere older. Somewhere we haven't found. In the next part, we'll push the timeline even further back, into the Ice Age itself, and confront the possibility that Göbekli Tepe was not the beginning of advanced culture. It was the last echo of something much older, something the world forgot. Göbekli Tepe presents us with a problem that refuses to stay buried. Because once you accept that its builders arrived with fully formed knowledge, a new question becomes unavoidable. Where did that knowledge come from? You do not invent engineering at the peak. You arrive there after centuries, sometimes millennia, of failure, correction, and refinement. But at Göbekli Tepe, the learning curve is missing. We see the masterpiece, but not the apprenticeship. To find the missing chapter, we have to step outside traditional archaeology and look at the larger world these people inhabited. And that world was unstable, violently unstable. Around 12,900 years ago, the Earth was warming rapidly at the end of the last ice age. Then, without warning, the climate snapped. Temperatures in the northern hemisphere dropped by as much as 10 degrees Celsius in just a few decades. Glaciers advanced. Ecosystems collapsed. Rainfall patterns shifted overnight. This period is known as the Younger Dryas. For over 1,200 years, the planet plunged back into near-glacial conditions. And then, just as abruptly, it ended. Around 9,600 BC. The exact date Göbekli Tepe was built. This timing is not subtle. It is precise, which is why a growing number of scientists believe the Younger Dryas was triggered by a cosmic impact. Fragments of a comet or asteroid may have struck the Earth, igniting massive fires, destabilizing ice sheets, and flooding the atmosphere with debris. Evidence includes nanodiamonds in ice cores, melt glass from extreme heat, a sudden extinction of megafauna, abrupt cultural disruptions across continents. This was not a slow decline. It was a planetary shock. Now consider what that means for human societies living at the time. Most Ice Age humans lived near coastlines. Coasts provide food, trade routes, and stable resources. But when the ice sheets melted, sea levels rose by hundreds of feet. Entire regions vanished beneath the ocean. Any settlements there are now lost, drowned, unexcavated. This changes everything. Because if an advanced Ice Age culture existed along those coastlines, experimenting with stone, astronomy, ritual, organization, its cities would now be underwater. What survived would be the refugees, the people who fled inland, to higher ground, to places like the Anatolian Plateau. Göbekli Tepe may not be the birthplace of civilization. It may be a restart point, a last attempt to preserve knowledge after catastrophe, a place where survivors gathered to encode memory into stone before it vanished. This idea helps explain something else. Urgency. Göbekli Tepe was built fast. There are no slow experimental phases, no tentative steps. It's as if the builders were racing against forgetting, racing against death, racing against time. And suddenly, the obsession with stone makes sense. If you have watched the world dissolve, coastlines swallowed, forests burned, species erased, you don't build with wood. You build with rock. You anchor meaning into the ground. You make memory heavy. We see echoes of Ice Age intelligence elsewhere. In Germany, the Lion Man figurine, a sculpture of a human with a lion's head, dates back 40,000 years. It is symbolic, abstract, and conceptual. In France, the Chauvet Cave paintings, over 30,000 years old, show perspective, motion, and mastery that rivals Renaissance art. The capacity was always there. What was missing was organization. Göbekli Tepe shows us organization. Genetics adds another layer. DNA evidence from the region shows mixing between distinct hunter-gatherer populations from Europe and the Near East. Göbekli Tepe sits at a crossroads, a meeting point, a refuge, a convergence zone for survivors. This also reframes mythology. Flood stories appear in cultures worldwide. Not just one, not just two, dozens. From Mesopotamia to India to the Americas. Each tells the same story. A world destroyed by water. A remnant saved. Knowledge preserved. For thousands of years, these were dismissed as metaphor. But when sea levels rise hundreds of feet, metaphor becomes memory. Even Plato's story of Atlantis deserves reconsideration. In his dialogues, Plato describes a powerful civilization destroyed by earthquakes and floods in a single day and night. Crucially, he dates this event to 9,000 years before his time. Plato lived around 600 BC. That places the destruction at 9,600 BC. The exact date Göbekli Tepe emerges. This does not mean Göbekli Tepe is Atlantis, but it does mean the memory of a cataclysm at that exact time was preserved for over 9,000 years. Göbekli Tepe is not proof of Atlantis. It is proof of memory. This reframes the site entirely. The animal carvings, the celestial alignments, the obsession with permanence. They are not signs of primitive superstition. They are the language of survivors, encoding warnings, recording trauma, anchoring identity. Göbekli Tepe may represent the final chapter of an Ice Age world, a world whose earlier chapters lie beneath the sea. A civilization not erased by ignorance, but by geology. In the next part, we'll return to the land and uncover something just as shocking. Göbekli Tepe was not alone. It was part of a vast network, a regional system. And once that network is revealed, the word civilization becomes unavoidable. For years, Göbekli Tepe was treated as a miracle, a one-off, a freak anomaly, like finding a skyscraper in the middle of the Stone Age. Archaeologists called it unique because they had to. There was no framework to explain it. No neighbors. No supporting cast. Just one impossible site standing alone. But that story didn't survive contact with reality. In 2021, something changed. A regional research initiative known as the Taş-Tepeler Project began mapping the wider landscape of southeastern Turkey using satellite imaging, geophysical surveys, and targeted excavation. What they found shattered the idea that Göbekli Tepe was isolated. It wasn't alone. It was the most visible node in a vast network. Scattered across the limestone plateaus and rolling hills of the region, archaeologists began identifying site after site, each sharing the same architectural DNA. T-shaped pillars, predator iconography, carved bedrock, ritual enclosures. Not one, not two, but at least 12 major sites. And that number is still growing. These sites are spread across a region nearly 200 kilometers wide. That distance matters, because you do not get architectural consistency across such a wide area by accident. You get it through communication, shared ideology, a standardized tradition. This wasn't a loose collection of tribes copying one another. This was coordination. If Göbekli Tepe was the cathedral, these other sites were part of the same system. Some were smaller. Some were more specialized. Some were even more disturbing. Together, they form what archaeologists now recognize as a regional ritual civilization, one that existed before farming, before cities, before writing. One site in particular changed everything. Located about 46 kilometers east of Göbekli Tepe is a place called Karahantep. And if Göbekli Tepe feels monumental, Karahantep feels intimate, claustrophobic, intentional. Instead of building upward with freestanding pillars, the builders of Karahantep carved directly into the bedrock. They sculpted the mountain itself. The most shocking feature discovered there is a rock-cut chamber containing 11 stone pillars, each rising from the floor. These pillars are not abstract. They are unmistakably phallic, raw, explicit, unapologetic. They stand in an uneven cluster, like a forest frozen in stone. And overlooking them, carved into the rock wall, is a human head. The head is not peaceful. Its eyes are wide. Its expression is alert. Its neck is elongated, serpentine, emerging from the rock like a living thing. It stares directly toward the chamber entrance. And beneath that entrance is a drain, a functional channel designed to carry liquid out of the room. This chamber was meant to be filled with what we don't know. Water, blood, a fermented drink. But it was designed for flow. Imagine entering that space 11,000 years ago. A torchlight flickering, stone walls closing in, wading through liquid, surrounded by phallic pillars, watched by a disembodied stone head. This is not symbolic art. This is designed experience. Psychological architecture at its most primal. Another site, Sabers, revealed something even more unexpected. A narrative relief carved into a limestone bench. Two human figures. Two leopards. A bull. The humans are not passive. They are interacting with the animals. One holds his own phallus in a display of dominance. This is not decoration. This is storytelling. At Göbekli Tepe, animals appear isolated, symbols without context. At Sabers, they are part of a scene, a myth, a legend, a shared story everyone in the region would have understood. This tells us something crucial. These people didn't just share tools or techniques. They shared mythology. And mythology doesn't spread easily. It requires language, a tradition, a repetition, which means these sites were connected by regular movement of people. Travel routes, trade paths, ritual calendars. This was not a static culture. It was dynamic, alive. The network also solves a mystery that plagued archaeologists for years. Where did these people live? Göbekli Tepe itself has no houses. Critics argued it must have been a ceremonial site used briefly and abandoned. But excavations at other sites, especially Karahantep, revealed residential structures nearby. Living zones, working zones, ritual zones, a space divided by function. This is planning. This is urban logic without cities. What we are seeing is not a temple, not a village, but a civilizational system built around belief, ritual, and coordination rather than bureaucracy or kingship. No walls, no palaces, no armies, yet it covered a massive region. This forces a redefinition of civilization itself. We are conditioned to associate civilization with writing, cities, and agriculture. But the Stone Hills culture had something else. A shared meaning, a shared labor, a shared identity. And stone was the medium that held it together. Göbekli Tepe was not a lonely miracle. It was the capital, the symbolic heart of a world we never knew existed. And once you see that network, the final question becomes unavoidable. If such a system could rise, what brought it down? In the next part, we'll confront the final act of this civilization, not its birth, but its disappearance, and the chilling possibility that it ended not with fire or conquest, but with a choice. Civilizations usually end loudly. War, fire, conquest, collapse. We expect broken walls, mass graves, burned layers of ash. Göbekli Tepe gives us none of that. No battlefield, no siege, no invasion. Instead, it gives us something far more unsettling. Control. There is no evidence that the Stone Hills civilization was destroyed. They were not conquered. They were not wiped out. They ended themselves. And they did it methodically. Across Göbekli Tepe and its sister sites, archaeologists see the same pattern. Construction slows. Ritual spaces shrink. Craftsmanship declines. And then, at a precise moment in time, activity stops. Not abruptly, intentionally. The people did not abandon their sacred spaces to decay. They dismantled nothing. They destroyed nothing. They buried everything. The backfill used to seal Göbekli Tepe is not random debris. It is curated. A clean soil, a broken limestone, animal bones carefully distributed. No household trash. No chaos. This was not a dump. It was a ritual act. Imagine the scale of this decision. Hundreds of people, possibly thousands, gathering one final time. Not to celebrate, not to build, but to close. Stone by stone, layer by layer. They filled the enclosures slowly, carefully encasing the pillars like relics. They were not erasing memory. They were preserving it. Why? One explanation is ideological exhaustion. The belief system that once unified them may have become too heavy, too demanding, too costly. Feasts require surplus. The surplus requires farming. Farming requires hierarchy. Hierarchy breeds inequality. Perhaps the society reached a breaking point. The machine that once held them together began to consume them. Another possibility is knowledge dilution. As generations passed, fewer people understood the original meaning of the symbols. The rituals continued, but their purpose blurred. The priests repeated actions they no longer fully understood. At some point, the system loses legitimacy. And when belief fails, monuments fall silent. But the most chilling possibility is foresight. What if they knew something was coming? Another climate shift. Another collapse. Another flood. If the Stone Hills people were survivors of catastrophe once before, they may have recognized the warning signs. Instead of rebuilding endlessly, they sealed the knowledge, preserved it, left it for whoever came next. Because burial is not destruction. It is storage. Think about it. If you wanted to preserve delicate limestone carvings for 10,000 years, you wouldn't leave them exposed. You would bury them. Protect them from wind, rain, and erosion. You would hide them from looters. You would put them to sleep. Göbekli Tepe survived precisely because it was buried. The people who sealed it understood time better than we do. They understood decay. And they understood patience. After the burial, life didn't end. People didn't vanish overnight. They dispersed. They settled. Farmed. Their descendants became the agricultural societies of the Neolithic world. But something was lost. The unified vision. The shared monumental purpose. The cosmic memory. A civilization didn't ascend from Göbekli Tepe. It fragmented. This reframes everything we think we know about progress. We imagine civilization emerging step by step. But Göbekli Tepe suggests something far stranger. That humans reached a peak of coordination, symbolism, and knowledge. Then chose a simpler path. Not because they couldn't continue, but because they decided not to. This is not the story of failure. It is the story of restraint, of walking away, of burying power instead of letting it rule you. And that may be the most radical idea of all. That the first great civilization didn't collapse under its own weight. It recognized the danger and stepped back. In the final part, we'll bring the story home. What Göbekli Tepe means for us. Why it matters now. And why this ancient decision, to build, to remember, and to bury, may hold a warning we are only beginning to understand. Göbekli Tepe is not dangerous because it is old. It is dangerous because it is familiar. The longer archaeologists study it, the harder it becomes to pretend that its story belongs only to prehistory. Because the forces that shaped the Stone Hills civilization are the same forces shaping our world right now. A belief, a surplus, a hierarchy, a control. We recognize this pattern. We are living inside it. The people who built Göbekli Tepe did not lack intelligence. They were not naive. They understood logistics, psychology, astronomy, and engineering at a level that should not have existed at the time. But intelligence alone did not save them. Neither did technology. What mattered was how their society organized meaning. Göbekli Tepe began as a solution, a place to gather, to remember, to coordinate, to anchor identity after catastrophe. But over time, that solution became a system. And systems have inertia. They demand maintenance. They demand expansion. They demand obedience. The rituals required food. The food required farming. The farming required control. The control required hierarchy. And hierarchy always creates distance between those who decide and those who labor. This is not ancient history. This is the operating system of civilization. What Göbekli Tepe shows us is not the birth of oppression, but its inevitability once belief becomes infrastructure. Once meaning is tied to monuments. Once identity is tied to place. Once authority is tied to ritual. The system no longer serves the people. The people serve the system. And here is the uncomfortable part. The Stone Hills people recognized this. They did not fight it with violence. They did not double down. They chose something far more radical. They stopped. They buried the structures that gave certain individuals power. They dismantled the stage. They walked away from the center. In doing so, they fragmented their society, but they also freed it. This was not collapse. It was exit. Modern civilizations do not exit. They accelerate. When faced with instability, we build faster, bigger, higher, more complex. We believe that more technology will solve problems created by technology. Göbekli Tepe suggests a different wisdom. That sometimes the most advanced choice is restraint. This is why the site unsettles historians. Because it implies that human history is not a straight line toward improvement. It is a cycle. Build, organize, centralize, overextend. Forget why you began. Then choose, consciously or not, whether to continue. The Stone Hills people chose memory over dominance. They encoded their story in stone. Not with writings, not with kings, but with geometry, symbolism, and placement. They assumed that whoever found it would be intelligent enough to ask questions. They assumed curiosity would survive even if culture did not. They were right, and now the message has reached us. A civilization capable of moving mountains without wheels, capable of chemistry without laboratories, capable of astronomy without telescopes. They did not vanish because they were weak. They vanished because they were aware. Look around the modern world. Rising seas, a climate instability, a resource strain, the systems growing too complex to understand. The parallels are uncomfortable. Göbekli Tepe is not a prophecy, but it is a mirror. It asks a question we are not trained to answer. What happens when a society realizes that its greatest achievement has become its greatest risk? Do you reinforce it? Or do you bury it? For thousands of years, we assumed the past was primitive so that the present could feel inevitable. Göbekli Tepe breaks that illusion. It tells us that intelligence does not guarantee wisdom. That power does not guarantee longevity. And that forgetting may be just as dangerous as ignorance. The people of the Stone Hills did not leave us instructions. They left us evidence. They trusted us to interpret it. And interpretation requires humility. We are not discovering Göbekli Tepe. We are being confronted by it. It forces us to accept that human potential has risen and fallen before. That we are not unique. That progress is not guaranteed. And that sometimes, the most advanced civilizations leave behind only one message. Be careful what you build. In the final part, we will return to the hill itself, quiet now, wind moving across stone, and confront the last unanswered question. Not what Göbekli Tepe was, but why it waited so long for us. Today, Göbekli Tepe is quiet. The wind moves gently across the limestone ridge. The pillars stand exposed once more, their surfaces catching the same sunlight they last saw 12,000 years ago. No chants, no drums, no crowds arriving from distant hills. Just stone and questions. For 10 millennia, this place slept beneath the earth. Empires rose and fell above it. Languages were born and forgotten. Religions replaced one another. Cities were built, burned, rebuilt again. And through all of it, Göbekli Tepe waited. Not hidden by accident, hidden by design. The people who buried this site knew something we are only beginning to understand. Time destroys memory faster than it destroys stone. Words fade. Stories mutate. Meaning drifts. But geometry endures. Orientation endures. Mass endures. Göbekli Tepe was not meant to speak loudly. It was meant to last. This reframes the entire site. The pillars are not ruins. They are signals. Not instructions, but invitations. An invitation to notice that civilization has happened before. That intelligence has peaked before. That humanity has stood at crossroads before. And that survival does not always mean continuation. Sometimes it means restraint. Göbekli Tepe does not tell us what choice to make. It only proves that choice exists. That humans are not bound to endless expansion. That progress is not a law of nature. It is a decision. For generations, we comforted ourselves with the idea that ancient people were simple, that they lived in the dark while we live in the light. Göbekli Tepe reverses that comfort. It shows us people who understood forces we struggle to manage today. A social cohesion, a belief as infrastructure, a power encoded into space, the cost of hierarchy. They saw the trajectory, and they stepped away. That is not failure. That is awareness. Think about the final act again. They didn't smash the pillars. They didn't erase the carvings. They didn't flee in panic. They organized. They gathered. They filled the enclosures gently, layer by layer. They protected the very thing they chose to leave behind. This is not abandonment. It is curation. The most haunting possibility is this: they knew someone like us would eventually find it. Not their children, not their grandchildren, but a civilization far enough removed to see clearly. A civilization capable of asking the same questions they once asked. Göbekli Tepe is not a warning about the past. It is a conversation across time. One that only works if the listener is willing to be uncomfortable. Because if they were capable of this, what else have we forgotten? What knowledge rose, peaked, and vanished long before writing? What experiments ended before they became traditions? What civilizations left no cities because they chose not to? We are taught to look for progress in ruins, bigger buildings, sharper tools, more complexity. Göbekli Tepe asks us to look for wisdom instead. In restraint, in silence, in the decision to stop building before building consumes you. The people who carved these stones were not gods. They were humans, which means their story is not alien. It is familiar. They lived after catastrophe. So do we. They reorganized the world around belief. So do we. They built systems that grew larger than any one person. So do we. And eventually, they asked the question we are beginning to face now. How much is enough? Göbekli Tepe does not answer that question. It simply proves that answering it is possible. As archaeologists continue to excavate the stone hills, with over 95% still buried, we may find more structures, more carvings, perhaps even writing. But the core message will not change, because the message is not hidden in what we haven't uncovered. It is already visible. A civilization is fragile. Memory is fragile. And intelligence without humility is temporary. The builders of Göbekli Tepe moved mountains without wheels, engineered chemistry without labs, mapped the sky without telescopes, and then, with a clarity we still struggle to reach. They chose to walk away. As the sun sets over the ridge today, shadows stretch across the pillars just as they did 12,000 years ago. The stone remains. The people are gone. And the question hangs in the air, unanswered, but unavoidable. As if they were capable of letting go, will we be?